Talking about regulations isn't the most intrinsically interesting topic in the world, but it's very important for the oil and gas industry, and it's important that you have a familiarity with who are the primary regulators and what are the primary issues that people are dealing with. So we're going to look at who has what level of government has jurisdiction and what are some of the big issues. So I'd like you to look at this list and say to yourself who predominantly has the say on these issues. Now, interestingly, only the second bullet on this particular chart is primarily a federal issue. The rest of the issues are state issues. And I say predominantly because we'll see that there are cases where the federal government does get involved in these issues. The point as we jump into this is a lot of the relevant law that companies, E&P companies deal with is state law as opposed to federal law. Well, but let's take a look at where the federal government does have a lot of say in E&P operations. We know that the Bureau of Land Management controls onshore leasing. They also do the onshore permitting. In other words, BLM is the one that issues the rules for mining E&P operations on federal lands. And the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has the offshore regulation. What about in the states? Well, again, we've talked about in the class already that the primary regulator of oil and gas operations in the state, in Texas, is the Texas Railroad Commission, which is very inaptly named. I don't know whether this number is going to strike you as big or little, but the Railroad Commission has just under 800 employees to regulate the industry. Some of them work in the office, some are field inspectors. So there really are people that go out and randomly inspect to see whether the procedures are being complied with. You see the names of the other entities for other key oil and gas states, and you're more than welcome to look at the different websites and see what's just kind of basically take the flavor of how they approach that. We're not going to go back and talk about leasing, but I just wanted to include this slide to remind you these are the agencies that do the leasing of state trust lands. And again, notice that they're not the same people that do the regulation of the activities. But what you do want to get a sense of is that state laws are very, very different. For example, we talk a lot about the Permian Basin, and we know that there's acreage in both Texas and New Mexico. One of the ways that Texas and New Mexico laws differ regarding drilling operations is that Texas allows the open pits. So you remember seeing where on some of the drill sites, you've seen the photos where there's big scoops of land that are hewn out, and they put down a sheet of plastic, and that's where the mud pits are, basically the mud pits are external. Well, in New Mexico, that's not allowed. It's a closed loop system. So you don't see the big pits dug, which are lined by the plastic for the mud pits. It's all done in the tanks. Depending on what year you view this and what rig we got to go visit, you may have seen an open loop system where there's a lot of storage on the ground within the big pits, or a closed loop system where it's all in the steel tanks. Another example of how things are different is rules on fracking. So I would like you to stop this video, click on the link to see about the laws in New York. Okay, I really hope that you've watched the video about what's happening in New York, and it's something that people are passionate about on both sides. But here's the consequence of that. If you look at this little graphic on the right-hand side, which shows the gas pipelines, notice that there are some gas pipelines, the little squiggly, the little squiggles that indicate that these are the lines that are out to the wells as they're doing the collections and moving to the central areas. But notice there's not much in New York. I'll get that right. Not much in New York. And there's not going to be much more in New York, because with the ban on fracking, they're going to see no drilling activity. You can go to Drilling Info, look where people are drilling. Not in New York, because they need to frack the wells. So just by virtue of this one state law, it has significantly affected the E&P industry, because it's basically shut down operations in New York, which means no pipelines are being built, no royalties are being paid. lots of economic implications for that state. And that's why you see some of the tension and the emotion in that video, because if you were a mineral rights owner in New York, you're pretty ticked off because you're not going to get a chance to make money from those minerals. What are some of the issues that are percolating in the Texas regulatory environment right now? If you remember, the city of Denton several years ago passed a law banning fracking. Well, that was quickly overturned, and in 2015, Texas passed a law that basically said that individual towns and municipalities don't get a right to regulate E&P activities. So this was the idea of we're not going to allow these different municipalities to create a patchwork of regulations. We're going to keep everything standardized. How about injection wells causing earthquakes? That is a Railroad Commission issue, and they've issued guidance, and they've adjusted what's allowed in the permitting of injection wells. They recently made recycling frack water easier, and I should say produced water, really not frack water, so it's the water that comes up after they fracked a well, because they're trying to minimize the additional amount of, or reduce the amount of clean water that's used in the fracking process by allowing it to be refracked. And then this is more a leasing issue, but the Railroad Commission is still deep into the idea of horizontal wells, and specifically, what do you do when you have someone in the middle that doesn't want to agree? And just getting this idea of these long laterals create a lot of new municipal issues. Well, those are largely state issues. I'm going to end this video and start another video where we're going to talk about federal issues.